Welcome back, people. I'm here with somebody that's a legendary figure in the streets of Los Angeles. I don't think that there's anybody better alive that I could be speaking to about the early history of the Crips and the gang life in the city of Los Angeles and beyond. So I'm very excited to be sat down with Melvin Farmer today, and we're going to be getting into all of the early history about the Crips. So Melvin, do you want to just introduce yourself and tell me where you come from?
Melvin Farmer, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Been a resident here all my life and pretty much a historian from the life I lived and changed, where I went from a tax burden to a taxpayer.
That's amazing. So I want to start right back at the start, even before you were born. So from what I understand, your parents actually migrated from the South to Los Angeles as part of sort of a period that was known as the Great Migration. Is that right?
Yes.
And what was the reasoning for your family to move from the South to California?
Well, segregation as well as social unrest. You got the Ku Klux Klan. My mother was both my mother and father were born in little towns in Mississippi, Coldwater, that area. But my dad was raised in Memphis. So I was born here in '57. We went back to the South, and my sister was born there in '60. Then we came back. My other sister, I was in fact down there when Martin Luther King was slain. So most of the, on the east side, when we moved here, which I was telling you earlier, this avenue here, Central, where we at, was the hot knob for the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, starting back with Charlie Bird, Dorothy Dandridge, great blacks, where they had to be over here on the east side. And then eventually I moved to the west side, which was another form of opening the doors for blacks, because it was mostly whites over there.
So your family kind of moved to get a better life. What would you say kind of was the biggest difference once your family did, fully move to California? I know that kind of originally you stayed on the east side. How did life change for you and your family when you actually, finally had made that move and kind of escaped the South? Did things get immediately better, or did you begin dealing with different problems of the same sort?
Well, when we moved out here, I've always seen gangs starting in elementary. We stayed in some apartments right behind this continuation all-boys school, which was for delinquents back then in the '60s, called California High, and what was the other name it used to call it, but it ended up being Bethune. Reese, all-boys school, California High, then it's now a junior high. But I used to see the gangs of the '60s, the Slauson's, Businessman, Manchester Park Boys and stuff like this, South Park and stuff like this. They'll fight every day in the alley, take their shoes off, short skin, slacks, knitted shirts, Stacey Adams shoes, and they do rags, and they fight every day. This how the gangs were then. And then that was on the east side. My mama was working at a taco stand, probably making $1 an hour. And then, because my mother had me at 14 or 15. Now when we moved from the east side, that's south of the east of the 110, and we moved to the west side. Now it's integrated, and the things changed. You got giant slide, you got swimming pools, you got indoor basketball courts, you got theaters, you got fresh produce, fish markets, go-kart, miniature golf, the Forum, sports arena. You have Hollywood, you got Beverly Hills, you got the airport, you got Ladera Heights, you got black actors, you got everything that's happening now. And then they started busing us. So you could see Tookie at one end of the park and whites and Jews playing croquet at the other end of the park during this time. So that was a big difference. And also, wasn't no truancy. You had to be on campus. So a lot of stuff went on in them days on the campuses, because they'd take you to jail. And doing back then, you couldn't be housed in a substation as a juvenile And that's another thing we'll talk about is the effects and the laws that were created from the behavior back then that affect them now. They get punished. We got to tap on the wrist.
Absolutely, I want to hear more about that. So you just mentioned about, during your early time on the east side, the gangs that were already operating in the area, the Slawsons, the businessmen. I'd love to know how these organizations kind of differed from the Crips that came later. Were there differences? Were these organizations a little bit less organized or cohesive than what came later? Can you maybe explain to me what that was like?
Well, from what I've seen, they were they were rebelling against the police. And a lot of them were not only a gang, because people need to know the difference between a street gang and an organized crime. A street gang, which is basically Crips, Mexican Mafia, and Hell's Angels, the other two get held to a higher standard and go to federal court because of their structure and organization, whereas a street gang for us is 14 to 24, and the difference, long as it's 3 or more, you can be considered a street gang. But what separates them is the criminal element. So the street gangs that I've seen, which that term didn't start, they were first had a cause. They were fighting against police and segregation and so forth. But they also, I seen them, they had cars, 2 parents, no guns did I ever see or even think they would think about maybe a knife. But usually they were fighting. That's what usually was going on. They were fighting. And it wasn't no status to be one or nothing like that. I'm seeing it from the 1st grade all the way up till today. Then when the government and other infighting started knocking down and changing internally, the Black Panthers and other organizations like that, going to prison and so forth, it created a vacuum starting in about 71, the end of 70, and that's when the Crips and the Blood started without the term blood. They just were Crips, and everything else was Van Ness, Boy, Pyru, so that term hadn't even started. But the difference is it was a whole new gang. Gun violence, PCP, going to jail. The cell doors didn't close on us. They didn't have no laws like back then. We getting at the most 4 years for a murder. There was no term gang enhancements. There was no being tried as a juvenile. There was no such thing as home invasion. You get caught with a gun, they give it back. There was no such thing as carjacking, no 10-20 gun laws. We were in an era, a window from 71 to 75 where I racked up 40 arrests. Most of the juveniles either had a murder by the time they were 18, and the third criteria, if they still living from back then, most of them have done over 35, 25 years or better. So the game changed in the 70s. Now, if you want to go to the 80s, every 10 years, the game changed again. Now you got drug dealers coming into the game, traveling to other states, and now the Crips are starting to go to where the gang banging come along with the drug dealing. That brought in the difference in weapons. The Uzi started coming.
Yeah.
So every 10 years, things start changing all the way up to now. You got 5 generations, but the one consistent is the sisters gun violence. You got them in my area where we didn't get jumped in. We got shot at or shooting back, and I always tell people we only protected ourselves. And we were naive.
Yeah.
Whereas now they do it on purpose like it's a badge of honor, and then they think they generations from here on in is what it's been about in our generation. That don't go like that.